This is a session on how to ask a professional you don't know for an informational interview. This is definitely a question that we get a lot at Career Services, so we're happy to kind of dive into some of the details about doing this. For our agenda for this session, we'll be talking a little bit about why networking is important. We'll then talk about how do you find people to conduct informational interviews, and then we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about how do you communicate your request for an informational interview, especially with someone that you've never met before, you don't know that person. We're going to be talking about some tips in terms of reaching out, and then end with some networking resources that you can peruse after this session. So why is networking important? So it is important for a lot of reasons. Definitely, a big one is just learning about career fields that you are interested in but don't know a lot about, right? If you have never done a certain type of role before, talking to people means that you are able to gather information about a field that you might potentially go into. Talking to people helps you understand what skills and experience are needed for those types of positions. Sometimes you can read a job ad, but you might not be clear on what is totally required, right, to succeed in a certain type of role. So networking is useful for that. If you are, let's say, pivoting to a different kind of career, networking and talking to people means that you can kind of listen to the language and the vocabulary that's used in a particular career field. So for example, when I finished my PhD, I was exploring the field of search consulting. And, coming from a history PhD background, people I was doing informational interviews with kept saying the word being client focused this and client focused that. And I didn't really know what that means. So, talking to people kind of helps you to be exposed to the vocabulary that's being used in a career field. Networking is also helpful to help you develop your own narrative, especially, for graduate students, for PhDs. If you are pivoting, transitioning to something that's slightly different than what you've been studying, networking is also a great way for you to practice telling your story, right? Your professional story. Obviously, networking means that you're going to build your network so that you know more and more people in a particular path that you're exploring. And then finally, it can expose you to potential professional opportunities, right? So if you conduct an informational interview with someone, it can mean that the person can, connect you with someone else, right? Who can share more information about something else that you're passionate about. Or, they might down the line have an idea for a collaboration and think of you, right? So networking is helpful for all of these different reasons. Where can you find people to conduct informational interviews with? I would say, it's always easiest to start with the lowest hanging fruit, which is people that you already know, right? So people who are already in your network. It could be people whom you went to undergraduate, graduate school, people who graduated a few years ahead of you in your graduate program. It could be conferences, people that you meet at conferences, symposiums, workshops, panels, anything that's hosted by your department or anything that's being held at Penn. These are all different ways to, be connected with people that you might share a common interest in, right? The other thing is tapping into the Penn network, the Penn alumni network, as well as your other network. Reaching out to Penn alums is like a really easy way to reach out to someone who already has something in common with you. So LinkedIn and MyPenn, which is Penn's new online alumni community, are great ways to find other people that you can reach out to for informational interviews. Now comes the part where, you've already done some research, you're excited about entering a particular path, you're curious to learn more about a certain field, and you have identified people, let's say from LinkedIn, from MyPenn. Now what do you do, right? We would recommend sending an email. So if you, let's say, find someone on LinkedIn, you can Google them and see what's their bio. If they have a bio on a company page, check that out. Definitely look at their LinkedIn profile first. LinkedIn sometimes will have their email listed. So if you don't find it there, the bio on the company page could be another place where you can find an email address. You can also kind of cross-reference. So if you found someone on LinkedIn, you can find them and look them up on MyPenn to see if their email addresses are listed on there. Email is best because compared to the other option, which is sending a LinkedIn message, for example, people may not be checking their LinkedIn accounts often. And so email, I would say, is the better way to communicate. If you cannot find someone's email address, I would then go ahead and recommend sending that LinkedIn message. A question that we often get from students is whether or not they should request to connect on LinkedIn before reaching out. I would advise to hold off on it. I think what's helpful is, when you first reach out to someone, you can introduce yourself, explain why you're reaching out to them, which I'll cover in the next couple of slides. And it gives people a little bit of information about you, but they don't quite know you yet, right? And so, sometimes people on the other end are a little bit nervous about accepting your connection on LinkedIn because, again, they don't know you. So I would recommend requesting to connect after you have sent them the email, and ideally after you've had that initial conversation with them. If you can't find the email address for whatever reason, if you, let's say, found them outside of LinkedIn and therefore can't send a LinkedIn message, and you've found them on my Penn, you can also message the alum directly on my Penn. So that's another way to communicate your request for an informational interview. So now comes the part where it might be hard for some people in terms of actually composing this message. So as you're writing an email, I would pay attention to a couple of things. So what I have in front of you all right now is a sample of a message that, let's say a student wrote to a hypothetical alum named Bob, and this person is interested in data science. So I'm going to read out the message. So, dear Bob, I'm currently looking for a job in data science, and I would be very interested in connecting with you. I am finishing up my PhD in the political science department at Penn, and will be looking to start a new job in January 2021. I am good at Python and R, and will plan to learn a few other programming languages this semester. In my current research, I use R to analyze complex data from electronic health records, and then there's more, 5 or 4 sentences on the dissertation research. I would be a great fit for data science jobs in healthcare. I'm particularly interested in Merck and other large pharmaceutical companies. So imagine, if let's say a graduate student were to send this email to an alum, right? So let's kind of dive in and kind of break down and deconstruct this message a little bit. So the first thing is, the person here is kind of going for a job and is making it pretty explicit about what they want out of this connection, which is that they're selling their skills. I'm good at this, I'm good at that. Here's what I've done. I would be a great fit for these jobs. And there's also a lot here about their own dissertation. So a couple of things about this is it's probably a good idea to avoid being that explicit about your job search. With informational interviewing, it's part of the networking process of building a relationship, right? It's not a transactional thing. So I'm going to show an example of a better message. So this person says, dear Bob, I hope this finds you well in these challenging times. I'm currently a PhD student in the political science department at Penn and came across your fascinating profile on LinkedIn. I'm interested in pursuing a career in data science and healthcare and was curious to learn more about your work in the bioinformatics group at Merck, seeing that you also made the transition from Penn's PhD program in political science to now working at a pharmaceutical. I'd be so grateful for the opportunity to chat with you and hear about your career path. Would you be willing to speak with me by phone or video for 15 to 20 minutes sometime in the next few weeks? So a couple of things that are different about this message is, this one has a greeting, right? To acknowledge the times that we're living in, introducing themselves, explaining how they found Bob, why they are interested in connecting with Bob, and also noting what they have in common, right? So the fact that they came from the same PhD program and is now working in a spot that the student might be interested in is made very explicit here. And the person in this message is also expressing their gratitude in advance for the opportunity to connect and to chat. And then there's also a very, very explicit ask at the very end of this message. One of the other questions that we also get is when you're writing a message, what is a good subject line? I would say that if you can have a subject line that's clear, simple, and descriptive, that's often really helpful. Something that indicates your connection with a professional. So what do you have in common with the person that you're reaching out to? Did the person graduate from the same program as you? Did you both go to the same undergrad together? What's the thing that you have in common? If, let's say, you were referred and connected to this professional through someone else, it's always helpful to include that name in the subject line too, so they know that you have someone in common. It can say, for example, a request for an informational interview from a Penn PhD student, Penn PhD interested in speaking about a career in data science, Penn alum pivoting to biotech, connecting via, so-and-so about industry career, right? These are just examples of a subject line that you can have. So summarizing some of these tips that we talked about with these sample messages, definitely I would say, acknowledge the current situation and be empathetic. It is a kind of different and challenging time that we're kind of living in. And so, starting out with a greeting, just one sentence to be empathetic is important. Write a brief note that makes clear who you are, why you are reaching out to that person specifically, what you have in common. If you're reaching out to someone who's a Penn alum, definitely make that clear. And then always include a very clear ask. And that ask means that you should have a question mark as you pose a question. Definitely express your gratitude, because you are asking someone to spare a little bit of their time to talk with you. And so it's helpful to just say thank you in advance. I'm so grateful if we could chat. So those are ways that you can express your gratitude. You might not get a response immediately or at all, and that's okay. I think a lot of people have inboxes that are crammed full of messages. The email that you sent might be buried at the bottom, or, for whatever reason, they just didn't get a chance to respond, right? And so kind of understand from their perspective that, it's nothing personal. So feel free to reach back out. So let's say if you haven't heard back within 10 days or 2 weeks, feel free to follow up, right? It can just be a very simple, dear so-and-so, I hope you're doing well. Quick line introducing yourself again, refer to the message below, and then again, express your gratitude. Like I said earlier, if you don't hear back after a follow-up, don't take it personally for a whole lot of reasons. So the first resource that I want to highlight is our informational interview guide for graduate students and postdocs. In this guide, which is pretty comprehensive in terms of explaining informational interviews, what they are, how do you conduct them, how do you prepare for them, what do you do when you're actually talking to someone that you want to connect with. It has a lot of information that can be really helpful for you, including a sample message where we also explain a little bit about how do you craft a good email that can ideally get the person on the other end to respond to you with a yes. So we go into some details in that guide. The other resource that I want to highlight is our Career Services career course on networking, which is also really helpful in terms of talking through networking. What does it entail? How do you be a good networker? Best practices to keep in mind. Definitely feel free to check that out on our YouTube page for Career Services,